Florida's real estate industry does not want you to see this video because the 12 towns I'm about to show you make every overpriced condo in Miami and every golf cart suburb in the villages look like a financial mistake. See, there's a version of Florida retirement that nobody talks about. The version where your home costs less than a new truck, your neighbors actually know your name, and you're not paying $6,000 a year in insurance just to live near a beach you visit twice. I spent months driving through the parts of Florida that don't make it onto the brochures, and what I found was a town with a working clown college surrounded by 47 giant murals. A fishing village so small that golf carts outnumber cars and nobody locks their front door. A place where you can legally swim with wild manatees before breakfast. And a Victorian village built around a lake so perfectly round that geologists still argue about how it got there. If any of that sounds better than a $2,000 HOA and a view of your neighbor's lanai, hit that subscribe button now. Because we're counting down 12 Florida towns the retirement industry hopes you never discover. Number 12, Sebring. When I first drove into Sebring, I almost missed the town entirely because I was looking for a downtown and instead found a circle, a literal traffic circle right there in the middle of everything, with a park inside it and Lake Jackson glittering behind the trees. The whole town is built around this circle like some kind of Florida Stonehenge, except instead of druids, you've got retirees eating lunch at the Lakeside Pavilion on a Tuesday afternoon. Sebring sits on the Lake Wales Ridge in Highlands County, which means it's right in the center of the state, about 2 hours from either coast. There's no beach. There's no ocean breeze, and somehow that's exactly the point. Because Sebring's cost of living runs about 17% below the national average, which in Florida, retirement math means your Social Security check suddenly stretches like it's working out. Median home prices hover around $260,000. For comparison, that wouldn't buy you a parking space in Boca Raton. The town got a serious facelift when HGTV's Hometown Takeover rolled through and renovated a bunch of the downtown storefronts, so now the Circle Park area has this charming, freshly painted small-town vibe that looks like a Hallmark movie set, but with better weather and cheaper rent. Lake Jackson has natural white sand beaches, which I didn't even know was a thing lakes could do. And every March, the Sebring International Raceway hosts the 12 Hours of Sebring, one of the oldest endurance races in America, where very expensive cars scream past at speeds that would terrify a normal person. The rest of the year, it's profoundly quiet. Advent Health Sebring gives you a full-service regional hospital right in town, and Highlands Hammock State Park has 1,000-year-old oaks that make you feel like you've stepped into a fantasy novel. For a town nobody talks about, Sebring is doing an awful lot right. I sat on a bench by Circle Park and ate a sandwich from a local deli while watching a blue heron fish Lake Jackson's Edge, and for about 10 minutes, I forgot that rent existed as a concept. That's the Sebring effect. It sneaks up on you. Number 11, DeFuniak Springs. I need you to picture something. A lake shaped like a near-perfect circle, about a mile around, spring-fed, 64 feet deep, with a 1.25-mile ADA-compliant sidewalk wrapping the entire shoreline. Victorian houses with gingerbread trim on one side, water on the other. That's DeFuniak Springs. And when I first walked that loop on a cool Panhandle morning, I genuinely could not believe this place existed and nobody had told me about it. DeFuniak sits in Walton County in the Florida Panhandle, about 60 miles east of Pensacola. The terrain here is different from the Florida most people imagine, rolling hills, actual elevation around 260 feet, cooler summers than anything south of Orlando, and a history that sounds made up but isn't. In 1885, this town became the winter home of the Florida Chautauqua, an adult education movement that drew thousands of people by rail to attend lectures and concerts in a 4,000-seat hall called the Hall of Brotherhood. The Walton DeFuniak Library, also from 1886, is one of the oldest continuously operating libraries in the state. And the name? Legend has it that Colonel Frederick DeFuniak won the right to name the town in a card game. Whether that's true or just perfectly Florida, it sets the tone for a place that takes itself seriously and not at all, both at the same time. Come December, the entire lake gets wrapped in the Christmas Reflections Festival, and thousands of lights reflect off that impossibly round water while you walk the loop and wonder why you ever paid $7 for coffee in Tampa. The population is under 6,000. The cost of living is well below the coastal side of Walton County. And you're 45 minutes from the Emerald Coast beaches if you ever want to remember what crowds feel like. Number 10, Dade City. When someone tells you there are hills in Florida, your first instinct is to call them a liar. And then you drive into Dade City, and you owe that person an apology. This is legitimately hilly terrain in East Pasco County, about 45 minutes northeast of Tampa, with a brick-lined downtown that feels like it was picked up from a small Appalachian town and dropped into the subtropics. Dade City's population is about 8,000 people, and most of the year it's a sleepy, conservative-leaning retiree community with antique shops and a historic courthouse and absolutely zero pretension. And then once a year, 40,000 humans descend on this tiny town for the Kumquat Festival. That's right. 40,000 people, roughly 5 times the town's population, showing up to eat kumquat pie, kumquat salsa, drink kumquat beer, and celebrate a citrus fruit the size of a grape with the enthusiasm normally reserved for the Super Bowl. Nearby St. Joseph calls itself the kumquat capital of the world, and the tradition traces back to a single tree planted in 1914. I tasted the kumquat wine. It's better than it has any right to be. For retirees, the appeal is the price tag and the proximity. You're close enough to Tampa to access major hospitals, but far enough out that the cost of living stays reasonable and the traffic stays non-existent. Advent Health Dade City handles the day-to-day medical stuff. The Withlacoochee River is right there for kayaking. The strawberry farms in the area do you-pick events every spring, and there's a small but loyal farmers market crowd that treats Saturday mornings like a social event. I watched a retired couple buy kumquat marmalade from a woman who made it in her kitchen that morning, and they talked for 20 minutes about absolutely nothing important. And it was the most relaxed human interaction I'd witnessed in months. That's the vibe. Dade City is Florida before it got complicated. Number 9, Apalachicola. I will be honest, I drove into Apalachicola expecting a cute little fishing village, and I drove out wondering if I'd accidentally found the best food town in America that nobody's ever heard of. The population is about 2,300 people, there are fewer than 5 traffic lights, and somehow, impossibly, there are 3 James Beard-nominated restaurants crammed into this tiny waterfront downtown. Apalachicola sits on the Forgotten Coast, which is the marketing name for the stretch of Gulf shoreline between Panama City and the Big Bend. And it's called Forgotten because the tourism industry actually forgot about it. You drive in along the Apalachicola River, past shrimp boats and tin roof cottages, and the whole place smells like diesel and brine and fresh oysters. Apalachicola Bay once produced about 10% of the entire country's oyster supply. The wild harvest got shut down in 2020 to let the reefs recover, and now cage-raised aquaculture has stepped in, which means the oyster culture is still alive, just evolved. The cost of living runs about 4% below the national average. Homes have climbed from under $180,000 in 2019 to somewhere in the mid-300s now, which is still shockingly reasonable for waterfront Florida. Trinity Episcopal Church is one of America's earliest prefabricated buildings, shipped in by schooner and assembled on site. And if you're the kind of retiree who cares more about a great meal and a quiet sunset than a golf course and a gated community, Apalachicola might be the most underrated town in the entire state. Fair warning, though, hurricane exposure is real here, and the nearest full-service hospital is a drive. Weems Memorial has 25 beds, which is enough for routine care, but not for emergencies that need specialists. Know that going in. Number 8, Inverness. Of all 12 towns on this list, Inverness might be the single best overall value for a retiree who just wants a nice, affordable, walkable town with a hospital and a good quality of life. And nobody outside of Citrus County has ever heard of it. When I first visited Inverness, I walked along brick sidewalks under oak canopies past a handsome 1912 courthouse and thought, this feels like someone designed a retirement town from scratch and then forgot to tell anyone about it. The median home listing is around $263,000. The cost of living is roughly 12% below the national average. And HCA Florida Citrus Hospital is right downtown, which matters more than anything when you're 65 and your knee is making that sound again. The town was named by a Scottish settler who thought Lake Henderson looked like the Scottish Highlands, which is incredibly generous to Lake Henderson, but also kind of charming. The 46-mile Withlacoochee State Trail runs directly through town, connecting parks, lakes, and small communities, and retirees use it like a linear town square, biking and walking and stopping for coffee. Inverness also hosts the Inverness Senior Games for athletes 50 and older, which is both inspiring and slightly terrifying to watch. And then there's Cooter-tober, a month-long festival honoring the town's native cooter turtles. There's a parade. There's competitive amateur wrestling called Small Town Slam. There's something called Cooterween. I'm not making any of this up. About 40% of Inverness residents are 65 or older, and they are clearly having the time of their lives. If you're enjoying this countdown and you haven't subscribed yet, now would be a great time. I cover towns like these every single week, and the next 6 entries are even wilder than what you've seen so far. Number 7, Cedar Key. The road to Cedar Key ends in the Gulf of Mexico. That's not a metaphor. State Road 24 just runs out of land and dumps you onto a cluster of tiny islands 3 miles offshore. And that's the town. About 700 people live here full-time. Golf carts outnumber cars, there are no high-rises, there are no traffic lights, and according to multiple locals I talked to, most people don't bother locking their front doors. When I first visited Cedar Key, I felt like I'd driven through a time portal. The town is a legitimate end-of-the-road fishing village that also happens to be a long-running artist colony, with co-op galleries and a seafood festival every October that's been going since the mid-1960s. Naturalist John Muir ended his famous 1,000-mile walk to the Gulf right here in 1867. And honestly, if I'd walked 1,000 miles and found Cedar Key, I'd stop too. Here's the wild card fact. Cedar Key produces somewhere between 90 and 95% of all farm-raised clams in the state of Florida, which is a roughly $45 million a year industry that replaced net fishing after the 1994 net ban. The town literally reinvented its entire economy around aquaculture. They also banned septic tanks outright to protect water quality, which tells you something about how seriously these 700 people take their environment. The 1854 Seahorse Key Lighthouse is the oldest on Florida's west coast. The birding is world-class, and the stone crab claws are the kind of thing that makes you rethink your relationship with seafood. For a retiree who wants genuine solitude and doesn't mind driving to Gainesville for serious medical care, Cedar Key is unlike anything else on this list. Just respect the hurricane risk. This place took a serious hit from Hurricane Idalia in 2023, and it's still rebuilding. Number 6, Crystal River. I'm going to say something that sounds like a tourism commercial, but I promise it's real. In Crystal River, Florida, you can wake up at dawn, put a kayak into Kings Bay, paddle through mist rising off 72-degree spring water, and have a wild manatee surface 3 feet from your face. Legally. This is one of the only places on Earth where swimming with wild manatees is permitted, and the experience is so surreal that I forgot to be cold, which I was. Because it was January, and I was in the water at 6 in the morning like a person who makes questionable life decisions. Crystal River sits on the Nature Coast in Citrus County, about 90 minutes north of Tampa. Kings Bay is fed by more than 70 natural springs. And in winter, hundreds of West Indian manatees migrate into the warm water. The Crystal River National Wildlife Refuge was created in 1983 specifically to protect these animals, making it the only federal refuge in the country established for a single species. But manatees aside, the retirement math works here too. New construction is available around $289,000. The cost of living runs about 6% below the national average and roughly 15% below the Florida average. I spoke with retirees who mentioned finding rentals under $700 a month, which in Florida feels like finding a unicorn. The nearby villages of Citrus Hills offers 3 golf courses for the country club crowd, and the scalloping, kayaking, and tarpon fishing keep the outdoors people busy year-round. Healthcare is handled by Nature Coast facilities, and the neighboring town of Homosassa Springs landed on U.S. News' top 10 retirement spots for 2026. The pace of life here is genuinely slow in a way that doesn't feel boring, it feels intentional. I met a retired firefighter from New Jersey who told me his blood pressure dropped 15 points within 6 months of moving here, and he credited the springs, the fishing, and the fact that his morning commute was now a 3-minute walk to a kayak launch. He also admitted he talks to manatees now, which I think technically makes him happier than 90% of Americans. Number 5. Lake Placid. All right. This is the one I've been waiting to tell you about, because Lake Placid, Florida is the kind of town that sounds fake until you actually go there and realize it's somehow even stranger than the description. Reader's Digest named it America's Most Interesting Town in 2013, and having walked every block of the downtown, I think they undersold it. Lake Placid has 47 larger-than-life murals painted across its buildings, plus artist-decorated trash cans, turning the entire downtown into an open-air gallery. It sits in Highlands County surrounded by 27 freshwater lakes. It calls itself the caladium capital of the world because it grows roughly 98% of the global supply of caladium bulbs on about 1,200 acres. And then, just when you think you've absorbed all of that, someone mentions Toby's Clown School and the American Clown Museum, which are real things that exist in this town, making Lake Placid home to more clowns per capita than anywhere in the country. The name itself has a great origin. Melville Dewey, as in the Dewey Decimal System, loved Lake Placid in New York so much that when he visited this Florida lake town, he named it after his favorite place. That's the kind of energy this town runs on, charming, slightly eccentric, and completely sincere about it. For retirees, Lake Placid is one of the most affordable options in the entire state. One-bedroom rentals have been reported as low as $700 a month. The town is walkable, flat enough for anyone with mobility concerns, and the Hen Scratch Farms Winery is exactly as delightful as you'd expect from a place that shares a zip code with a clown college. Lake June in winter. Scrub State Park preserves one of the rarest habitats in Florida, and every July, the Caladium Festival turns the town into an explosion of pink, red, and green that looks like someone spilled a paint store into a botanical garden. Number 4. Tarpon Springs. When I walked onto the sponge docks in Tarpon Springs for the first time, a man in full copper diving gear was climbing out of a boat with an armload of natural sea sponges, and a bakery across the street was pumping the smell of fresh baklava into the humid air. I thought I'd accidentally left Florida and ended up on a Greek island. Tarpon Springs has the highest percentage of Greek Americans of any city in the United States. More than 1 in 10 residents claim Greek descent, and the culture isn't decorative, it's structural. The town was built on the sponge diving industry in the early 1900s, when Greek divers brought their copper helmet technique to the Gulf Coast and turned Tarpon Springs into a sponge powerhouse that at one point out-earned citrus as a Florida export. Sponge diving is still practiced here. The sponge docks are still a working waterfront. And the high school teams are still called the Spongers, which is the best mascot name in America, and I won't hear otherwise. Every January 6th, the St. Nicholas Epiphany cross dive happens here. A priest throws a cross into the bayou, young divers leap in after it, and the crowd goes absolutely wild. It's the largest Epiphany celebration in America and can triple the town's population for the day. The Tarpon Springs Distillery makes the only ouzo produced in the United States, and Hellas Bakery will sell you a loaf of bread that makes you briefly angry at every other bakery you've ever visited. For retirees, Tarpon Springs is more affordable than its Pinellas County neighbors like Clearwater and St. Pete. And Advent Health, North Pinellas, is right in town. The population is about 25,000, big enough to have real amenities but small enough to know your barista by name. If you want a retirement that comes with a cultural identity instead of just a zip code, Tarpon Springs delivers. Number 3, Mount Dora. If you like festivals, Mount Dora will ruin you for every other town. This place throws more than 30 festivals a year, and the big one, the Mount Dora Art Festival every February, draws roughly 300,000 visitors to a town with a population of about 14,000. Do the math on that. It's chaos, but the beautiful kind. Mount Dora sits in Lake County about 30 miles northwest of Orlando, in what locals call the Golden Triangle of Lake Country. The downtown is hilly and walkable and overlooks Lake Dora, which connects to the 75,000-acre Harris Chain of Lakes. There's a freshwater lighthouse, one of only 3 in the entire state. Donnelly Street is lined with antique shops, galleries, and restaurants, and Renninger's Antique Market is a destination that people drive hours to visit. When I first walked through Mount Dora on a Saturday morning, the downtown was packed. Lawn bowling was happening in the park. A live guitarist was playing on a restaurant patio. And 2 retired couples were arguing about the best route to cycle around Lake Dora, which felt like the most wholesome conflict I'd witnessed in years. Florida Living named it Florida's friendliest small town, and based on the number of strangers who said hello to me unprompted, I'd say the title is deserved. Median sale prices run around $385,000 to $430,000, which is below most coastal Florida and a relative bargain compared to Tampa or Orlando. Advent Health Waterman is about 10 minutes away in Tavares. The community skews older, with a median age around 49, and the social scene is strong enough that loneliness, the real silent killer of retirement, isn't much of a threat here. If you like your retirement served with art, nature, and a packed social calendar, Mount Dora is hard to beat. If you've made it this far, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who are trying to figure out where to retire without going broke. All right. Top 2. Let's finish this. Number 2. Safety Harbor. Of all the towns on this list, Safety Harbor has the wildest origin story. In 1539, the Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto allegedly stood at the edge of a natural mineral spring on the shore of Tampa Bay and named it Espiritu Santo, the spring of the Holy Spirit, supposedly while searching for the fountain of youth. Whether he actually thought this was the fountain or just liked the water is lost to history, but the spring is still there, and the town is still drinking from it, metaphorically, and sometimes literally. Safety Harbor sits on the quiet northwest shore of Old Tampa Bay in Pinellas County, with a population of about 17,000. The Safety Harbor Resort and Spa, built in 1924 over those same mineral springs, is the only natural mineral spring spa in the entire state of Florida. The downtown is walkable, low crime, and has this unusual metaphysical streak that nobody prepares you for. There are herbal apothecaries on Main Street, astrologers, a psychic or 2. The ancient Baranoff Oak and the Tocobaga Indian Mounds in Philippi Park add a layer of genuine history that feels different from the manufactured charm of most Florida downtowns. Median sale prices have run in the high 500s to $670,000 range, so this is the pricier end of the list. But you're buying access to the entire Tampa Bay metro healthcare system, which is a massive advantage over the more remote towns. The Sunday Market on Main is a local institution, and the Safety Harbor Art and Music Center gives the arts scene a permanent home. About 26% of residents are 65 or older, and the median age is around 52, so the retiree community is established without being overwhelming. Fair disclosure, about 46% of properties carry some level of flood risk, so get an elevation certificate and a real insurance quote before you sign anything. Number 1, Punta Gorda. I saved this one for the top spot because Punta Gorda might be the best proof that a Florida retirement town can get knocked down, get back up, and still come out thriving. In 2004, Hurricane Charlie made a direct hit and devastated the downtown. They rebuilt. In 2022, Hurricane Ian came through and did it again. They rebuilt again. And today, Punta Gorda's restored 1920s downtown sits at the mouth of the Peace River on Charlotte Harbor, with a 2.3-mile harbor walk, the Fisherman's Village Marina, and shops and sailboat access canals that reach the Gulf without a single fixed bridge in the way. About half of all residents in Punta Gorda are 65 or older, half. That's not a retirement community within a town. That is a town that has fully and unapologetically organized itself around retirement. The cost of living runs 6 to 9% below the national average. Median home prices sit around $348,000 to $400,000. And the regional hospital has won enough awards that you don't have to worry about driving an hour for quality care. When I first visited Punta Gorda, I walked the harbor walk at sunset while sailboats slipped out toward Charlotte Harbor, and a man in a Hawaiian shirt offered me unsolicited advice about the best local grouper sandwich, which turned out to be excellent advice. Jazz on the Harbor was happening that weekend. The Hibiscus Festival was coming up. And every person I talked to over 60 told me some version of the same thing. They'd looked at Naples, Sarasota, and Fort Myers, done the math, and ended up here instead. Not as a consolation prize, as the smarter play. For retirees who want waterfront living, a real downtown, strong healthcare, and a community that has literally survived the worst Florida can throw at it, Punta Gorda earns the #1 spot. The 12 towns on this list aren't famous. They're not on the billboards. They don't have Super Bowl ads. But every single one of them offers something that the big Florida retirement cities lost a long time ago: character, affordability, a sense of place, and a front porch where someone might actually sit down and talk to you. If this video helped you rethink where to retire in Florida, subscribe to the channel. I drop videos like this every week covering the best small towns, the cheapest places to live, and the real estate tips that the industry doesn't put in the brochure. I'll see you in the next one.